Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 85 with Michael Redhill, award-winning Canadian author of Bellevue Square. Michael's a great guest with loads of interesting things to say about his process, his books and his journey to publication. There's also a trip to Book Bloggers Corner with Catherine Sunderland reviewing You Were Made for This by Michelle Sachs. Before that, I'll bring you up to speed with what's been going on with my writing, although speed is probably not the best way to describe my recent progress, as it does feel like things are moving a little slower as I work my way through the edits and now rewrites of the last section of my novel. I've had some brilliant feedback from a number of beta readers, including M.W. Leeming and Catherine Sunderland, and that's been pushing me to really focus on the climax of the book and make it as tense and fast-paced as I can. One thing that really resonated with me is the combination of the feedback I got from Catherine and something that's been striking me with books, film and TV that I've been consuming in recent weeks. The stories that work the best all have that one final crank of the tension wheel, and Catherine talked about raising the stakes, and that's been on my mind as I've worked on this final part of the novel. There's definitely one instance in my story where I had the opportunity to make things even more difficult for my protagonist, and having thrown that in, that extra spanner in the works, I've raised the stakes and hopefully created even more tension for the reader. It has meant that I've needed to rework the subsequent scenes and chapters, which is what's kind of slowed my progress, but I do know the novel will be all the better for it. A couple of great examples of this in books I've read recently are Emma Viskich's first book, Resurrection Bay, and Steve Kavanagh's latest, 13. Both do a great job of cranking the tension in the final act, and I recommend you check them out for yourself. Actually, Emma's going to be a guest on the show in a few weeks. Probably hear my cat there crying in the background. Anyway, Emma will be a guest on the show in a few weeks, and I listened to 13 on Audible. And don't forget you can get a free 30-day trial of Audible by going to audibletrial.com/joined-up. Right, let's get to today's interview and my chat with Michael Redhill. Michael is a Giller Prize-winning novelist, poet and playwright. He's the author of novels Consolation, longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, Martin Sloan, a finalist for the Giller Prize, and most recently Bellevue Square, which actually won the 2017 Scotiabank Giller Prize. He's written a novel for young adults, 4 collections of poetry and 2 plays, including the internationally celebrated Goodness. He also writes a series of crime novels under the name Inga Ash Wolf. Despite the fact that Michael was talking to me from the UK rather than Canada, we didn't actually have the best connection at the beginning of the conversation, but bear with it because it does improve and you'll definitely want to hear what Michael has to say. Okay, Michael, thanks a million for joining us on Joined Up Writing Podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So, well, first start, tell us where you actually are. So you're actually over in the UK at the moment.
Yes, I'm in Harpenden at a pub called the Harpenden Arms. It's a beautiful sunny evening here and a nice little town. And I have an exhausted Catherine beside me.
Who's been looking after you. So you've got quite a busy schedule at the moment.
Yeah, things will lighten up now. We're going to go to Edinburgh tomorrow, 2 days, and then back to Canada.
Excellent. Well, just to start us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your latest book and the kind of thing that you've been riding around with at the moment, which is Bellevue Square, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, Bellevue Square, back before it was published, when I was trying to tell people what the book was about, I told them that it was a doppelganger novel told from the point of view of the doppelganger. So it's sort of an impossible point of view, such as you might wonder what happens to characters after the book is over, like what kinds of lives do they continue to lead, or what lives did they lead before they became book characters. So I liked the idea of presenting the reader with a first-person narrator who seems completely together, who then begins to disintegrate at the same rate that the reader's experience sort of changes as they get deeper into the book. And I'm fascinated with the idea of how precious ourselves are to ourselves. They're really they're the only things we can claim to have. And if that ever comes under threat, either through mental illness or through some kind of brain injury, or in Jean's case, through some kind of mechanism that she doesn't understand, then you're in a situation that I guess sometimes we find ourselves in our lives when our lives change drastically and we begin to question the roots of our existences.
And was there a particular moment that it kind of clicked for you, the story? You thought, I'm onto something here, or did it right from the outset? You thought, well, this is a novel and it's kind of got the legs for a longer work.
I was kind of circling the idea, and the title of the book is named after a park that's in a marketplace in Toronto called Kensington Market, and it's a very busy little park where people from all walks of life come through. And I was sitting in there one day, and I thought, how would you handle, in reality, rather than as a genre or science fiction, how would you handle if somebody who looked exactly like you confronted you? Like, really, what would you do? So I started from that mindset instead of playing with it as a TV trick or more of a sci-fi
sure,
approach.
You sort of treated it as if it was a real, you tried to think about it logically as if it really happened.
Exactly. Yeah, and I tried to write as naturalistically as I could so that the reader didn't end up sort of twigging the way you do when you read different kinds of genres to the mood that's being created and the tone. I wanted to be able to pull the rug out from under the reader at some point.
Absolutely. Well, it's obviously proved a successful formula because congratulations, you just fairly recently last year, wasn't it? In the back end of last year now, you won, was it the Giller Prize?
Yeah, it's called
Is it the Giller?
Scotiabank Giller Prize.
Yeah. So which was obviously a huge achievement, and with a prize to match as well. It was $100,000 going to the winner. So tell us a little bit about that journey and how you felt about. Well, first of all, when you were longlisted and shortlisted, and obviously then you were named as the winner.
Right. Well, I mean, every time you publish a book, you have high hopes for it, but if you're experienced as an author, you know that it may just vanish without a trace, or it may have a different kind of life down the road. So to be longlisted was as much as I could have hoped for. It was a huge long shot just to be longlisted. And winning the prize, it's an experience that kind of gets set beside real life. Because even if you imagine something like that happening to you, it's nothing like what it is when you hear your name called. I mean, I've seen some of the footage leading up to the announcement, and it goes on my face, and I look totally blank. But it was a beautiful moment. It was nice to share it with my partner. My mother was there, and I think I was a popular winner. I've published a lot of books in Canada. I don't think anyone resented that I had won the prize. I had a lot of support after the fact, a lot of excitement, in my own community and the larger community of readers and writers at large. And it's just been a very, very positive thing.
It's excellent. Well, as I say, congratulations. And I know that afterwards you made the slightly tongue-in-cheek comment about the prize helping you to make ends meet, as I know that was something you kind of mentioned before on your Facebook page. And I'm sure there's still lots of people out there that assume that every published author is making lots of money. So can you give us a sense of what it's actually like for most people that make their living from writing, i.e. the majority of authors who aren't, Stephen King or Lee Child or J.K. Rowling? Right. What's the reality of it?
Well, I think the reality was illustrated by a post I made 2 days after the prize. I put up a picture of my deposit slip because I had gone to the bank and I had deposited the $100,000 check.
and my balance was $100,411. So that was a very stark reminder of what life as a writer can be. Although not very many writers have the opportunity to go from poverty to wealth overnight. Like that, but it got me into a little bit of trouble because I deposited the check into my own bank, which is not the same bank that sponsors this.
You should have kept it quiet.
$100,000 is a lot of money to have, on one day, but 2 years later, it will be all gone. So the prize also helps me to keep my name in play. It will attract readers to the next book, and hopefully I'll have momentum that will carry on for a little while and allow me to just focus on my writing rather than doing all the sort of ancillary things that writers do in order to bring in money, whether it's writing reviews or doing editing or, ghostwriting even. So it's nice to be freed to just be with my own thoughts.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things I was going to kind of ask you about, because again, for people that are maybe aspiring to be, a published author or make a living from writing, whatever that looks like. So you gave us a sense of just some of the things, and that's if you can do things that are associated with writing, because lots of people have different day jobs that not even remotely linked to writing, just to pay the bills. So
right, and they're up at 5 a.m. writing for 1 hour, and that's all the time they have, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So how did you, obviously when you're doing all those kind of work writing things, as you say, editing or ghostwriting or whatever it is, things that are not your projects, how do you kind of balance that, both from a time point of view, but also the distraction that it can have from you doing your own work and your own novels or your own plays or whatever it is that you're working on at the time?
Yeah, well, if you're editing other people's work, or if you have students, and I often teach, it's a little bit like having a clamor of other voices in your head, and it can put you off your game. So sometimes if I have a lot of student work to do, or I won't even try, I'll just set a day or 2 days aside to get that work done, and then try to get back centered in my own mind to work. But it's also, writers work alone, so to have, other voices around you is also nourishing. And I like to work with other people because, I don't know if you do editing yourself, but you can always solve another writer's problems. You can't solve your own. So to be able to give some clear guidance to somebody whose work you're reading for the first time, so you're not mired in drafts and drafts like you are with your own work. And to be able to just see things clearly and offer that to another writer, whether it's a colleague, a student, or a client, it is a very positive experience, and it keeps the part of yourself that's required to your own work and to be hard on yourself, to keep that sharp and alive.
Absolutely, it's rewarding as well, isn't it? But as you say, it's often much easier to see those problems and those issues with other people's writing than it is your own. Sometimes you're so close to it that you just can't see it.
Yeah, and sometimes I've had the experience of putting something away in a drawer for a year or 2 years, and then being able to take it back, and suddenly it's obvious. You have to cut that chapter, but you could never have seen it if you had kept working on it, So that's also one approach I take. I tend to write more than one thing at a time, and when I get stuck on something or fed up with something, I'll just let it, go on a low simmer in a drawer somewhere, and then come back to it when I kind of forgot what was bothering me about it, and take another crack at it.
And so give me a sense of like what your actual road to publication was. What was your first novel, or at least the first novel that you got published, and give us a sense of that.
Yeah. So I published my first collection of poetry when I was 19, and I published 3 more collections after that before I thought I wanted to tackle more long form work. And my first novel, which was published in 2001 and is called Martin Sloan, took me 10 years to write, and I wrote 12 drafts, and I threw things out, and I gave up on it. But it finally became itself after a long process of making mistakes. And I guess I also learned how to edit myself through that process too. By that point, I had published some poetry, and I had a little bit of purchase, if you know what I mean, in the community.
Yeah,
and I had
built a bit of a name. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in Canada, the writing community is small enough and tight enough that if you contribute and you try to grow, eventually you're kind of welcomed in, or the opportunity to publish with larger companies comes along. Like, for instance, one thing that really changed my life was the fact that before I had even finished Martin Sloan, an editor I knew from a large press said to me that she wanted to see the book before anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So she opened the door for me, and then she ended up publishing me. But by that point, I had been a published writer for almost 15 years. So it was almost a logical progression in some ways.
Well, you say that, but then presumably some people, depending on what whereabouts in the world you are and what your attitude to writing, some people might say poetry to writing a novel is it's a very, very different. I mean, I certainly wouldn't fancy going back the other way because I'm terrible at poetry. But did you? I mean, regardless of what the outside perception was, how did you feel about it, or did you not really think about it like that? Did you just think, well, I've just got a story that I want to tell, and I can see it as a novel? Because some people see the two things as being quite different, or at least different disciplines.
Yeah. Well, in Canada, there tends to be poet novelists, people like Michael Ondaatje and Margaret Atwood, for instance, both started in poetry, and I don't know how that became a route for writers, but it's not uncommon in Canada, I guess, to start off, in the small presses, publishing experimental work or poetry or stuff that's kind of out there. By the time I had an idea for a novel, I didn't know how to attack the idea, so I just kept trying and just kind of throwing darts at the target and trying to build up. Because there's, like you say, there's not really a strong relation between poetry and novel writing, except that the attention to detail that the poet gets used to is something that really serves you as a novelist, because you're constantly trying to see things in a more molecular way. You're trying to get closer. You're trying to get more specific. You're trying to find that just that right way of putting something that will cause what you want to bloom in the reader's mind to bloom. And I think it's an excellent apprenticeship in a way, like to work in a form that distills language down the way that poetry does. I think it's good training.
Yeah, it really is. As you say, it's that distillation, and it's such a. You've got to be so disciplined, haven't you, with poetry, because it really is about getting to the purest essence of an idea, isn't it? Poetry, whereas prose, right? And you can just write for pages and pages and pages if you want to. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing, but sometimes you can really go for pages and pages trying to describe an idea. Well,
one of the things that I always try to impress upon younger writers is that if you can say something in fewer words, you must. And economy is very important in prose, and so when you're writing poetry, you have a very small area of space to operate in, unless you're writing epic poetry. But the idea is to condense and intensify emotion and language and association and all that kind of stuff. So it does contribute, I think, to the practice of being economical with words, but also seeking the most power you can from what the language offers you.
Absolutely. And when you first started making that jump, so did you, in terms of how you approached writing that first book, did you have like a set way of going about it? Did you outline it first, or did you just think, right, well, I've got this kernel of a story and I'm just going to start writing? How did you kind of approach the novel writing?
Yeah, I never plan in advance. any more than having a sense of what direction I'm going in and something that I'm obsessed by. So when I wrote Martin Sloan, I think I sort of tied my shoelaces together and began running backwards. I wrote so many really unreadable drafts of that book, and I think originally I was importing the apoetic structure of some kind that wasn't going to work in a long form piece of fiction. So I had to gradually let go of that ethic and begin to interact with the prose the way a novelist does, which is to question everything from the language down to the character's intent. And a long form work is like juggling 12 balls for 10 years. You have to keep track of so many different things until stuff gels. Mm-hmm. Like I was saying before, it's a bit of a mystery when a book finally becomes itself and you can see it on the page. You're not quite sure how you did it, because every step of the way has been a struggle with something small. Because you can't write the whole novel at one sitting. Even if you write out a plan on index cards, you're still servicing something that is so unwieldy that you're forced to focus on little bits of it until finally you can stand back from it and say, okay, this thing has some unity. It's one thing between two covers. How you get there, in fact, recently I've just been finishing a book. And I've been taking notes, like writing a diary, because when people say, "How do you write? Where do you get your ideas? Mm-hmm. What craft is involved?" I can never ever remember what I went through. So now, as I'm struggling with various little details and little technical things, I've been taking notes for the first time in my life to remember how I put the problem to myself, how I failed to solve it, and then how I actually succeeded in solving it. Because once that's done, for some reason, it's wiped from my mind.
I think you're right. It'd be interesting to see how those notes affect the next project that you work on. Do you think you'll refer back to them?
I probably will, but only out of interest, not to instruct myself, because every new book is a new set of problems. Mm-hmm. What I hope will reassure me is that I'll read notes to myself at a time when I thought there was no way forward, and then found a way forward. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of times when you just have to stop because you're stuck and you don't have any clue where you went wrong. Mm-hmm. So it will be reassuring to have the book I'm writing about in these little journal notes out in the world, because that'll mean that as best I could, I solved the problems of the book.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of how you approach each novel, does it have its own approach, or have you found that has your process refined or changed in any way as you've gone along with experience?
I think the only thing that each novel has in common is that there's some kind of glowing kernel at the center of the conception or the idea. It's the thing that I hang on to throughout the entire writing. And it may be a very small detail. Maybe it's the ending. Maybe it's one particular character arc. But something that it's almost like a ladder that leads you down into the dark. You have the ladder, but nothing else. Mm-hmm. So like for the book that's coming out next fall, I have the book that follows Bellevue Square is called Mason of Tunica. Mm-hmm. And Tunica is a town in northern Mississippi. And the entire time, what has animated my interest in the book is dealing with the problem of a man who is he's still grieving his dead wife, who is a ghost in the novel and accompanies him on the journey that he's on throughout the book. And so the entire time I've been writing this book, and I've been writing it since 2007, I've been trying to find a balance where I can write a naturalistic ghost who reflects the psychological reality of the main character, but at the same time is playing a role in the unfolding of the story in a natural way. Mm-hmm. So that's been, I like to have one big problem to chew on for however long it takes me to finish a book, because it motivates me, right? Mm-hmm. It's a big problem. If there's an easy answer to it, then I'll lose interest. Mm-hmm. But because this is such a knotty problem, Knotty, mm-hmm. It has kept my interest alive for all of these years. And now that the book is almost finished, I found out how I solved that problem. Whether it's successful or not, I guess is sort of up to, the reader of the book.
Sure.
But yeah, having that one key thing that is a real challenge. The way that the big issues in our lives are challenges, it accompanies you day by day. And I think about it while I'm writing all the time. I think in the shower. I think while I'm going to bed. And it's a good thing. It's like having a job.
So
almost exactly like having a job.
And so you have no issue with essentially keeping several novels in your head at any one time. Obviously, if that book, as you say, that you're writing there has been hanging around since sort of 2007, presumably while you've been working on numerous other projects.
Exactly.
And then how do you approach? Is there something that makes you go back to it? When it's sat in the drawer or on the hard drive or wherever it is.
Sometimes a light bulb goes on and you just go, oh yeah, and it just seems obvious. You go back and make some major change or a major cut and it reveals itself to you for the first time. And it's a wonderful experience when it happens. But I think that one of the things that has worked for me in my process is that having more than one thing going at a time means that on some level I'm in touch with my unconscious over a period of time. Mm-hmm. And I've learned to trust that the things I return to, the things that I continue to obsess about, are the things that are most worthwhile spending my time on. And I know that different projects sort of cross-pollinate each other. Mm-hmm. That there's an idea from one book that gets expressed a little differently somewhere else, and I like that feeling of some kind of internal consistency to my writing life that I'm drawing on no matter what I'm working on.
Have you ever had anything that you just haven't been able to sort out? It's still sitting there waiting for you to return, or has there been anything that you just think, right, I'm definitely going to have to abandon that? I don't think I'll ever be able to go back to it.
Yeah. Well, this novel, Mason of Tunica, is something that sat in a drawer for 5 years until I picked it out again, and I was done with it. It was over. I wasn't going to do any more work on it. And I have another novel that's 30,000 words now that I set aside 10 or 12 years ago, and only now am I beginning to think about it again. I thought I had abandoned it, but as my life goes on, I begin to recognize that things that don't reveal themselves to you when you're working on them may still be an important part of your overall creative engine. So nowadays, I'm not too worried. If I never go back to something, I say to myself, it was still important that I did it.
You still got something out of the process when you were doing it at the time.
Right, and it might just be a tiny little thing that I take away that ends up nourishing poetry or turning into a short story or somehow being of use. So I never resent or regret the time I spend on things that end up having to be backburnered for however long. And I'm sure when I die, I'll have a couple unfinished things. But it's nice to have something to go back to. So yeah, it gives you a new lease on life every time you pick something out of the drawer and get excited about it again.
Okay, let's take a quick break there for this week's Book Bloggers Corner. And this week, Catherine Sunderland reviews You Were Made for This by Michelle Sachs.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
This is a really bold novel and a novel of our time. It echoes themes and ideas from the slap lullaby and the hand that rocks a cradle, and it plays on our fears that life is more fragile than we care to admit. It reminds us that we lie to each other every day through our social media feeds, through our conversations, and worse still, maybe we lie to ourselves. Told alternatively from the points of views of Mary and then Sam, the story starts in an idyllic house in a Swedish wood. A life away from the rat race, a life full of homemade jam, wholesome meals and quality time as this new family build their life together. If you saw us, you'd probably hate us, says the opening line. Well, yes, probably. The chapters are very short, but even by chapter 2, it was difficult to stomach Mary and Sam. However, very quickly, you feel that there's something is not perfect, and by chapter 3, all is revealed that in fact there's something incredibly disturbing, dangerous and dark about this couple. From this point onward, Sachs creates an impressive atmosphere of tension and threat. The characters remain difficult to like because even though there are sudden slips on the shiny facade, even though there are recurring unchecked remarks, acknowledgements about their unhappiness, they are unable to fully admit the reality of what is happening. This truly is a dark and distressing story, treacherous and traumatic. Sachs' novel is perhaps more raw, brutal and uncomfortable than something like Lullaby. There is a delusion, but it isn't just a couple who know they're turning a blind eye. This is a couple who are actively, emotionally destroying each other through their behaviour and games. Sam, Mary and Francis are all deluded, all with skewed motivations, all suffering on some level with mental health issues and all redefining the word toxic. The writing is bleak. Even the secondary characters are suffering loss, tragedy and pain that they can't share openly. I'm not sure whether I can use the word enjoy with this novel, but I was fascinated or captivated, and I stayed up far too late on too many nights to finish reading it. Something compelled me to know what happened to them, and these characters found their way into my head. I was in the house, in the wood, watching from the shadows, trying to see what I wasn't being shown, try to work out how they would be redeemed or saved. You Were Made for This asks challenging questions about modern-day parenting, motherhood, marriage and perception. The characters are incredibly morally complex and the issues and themes in this novel are bold but honest. The short chapters, the fast pace and the accomplished prose makes this an accessible thriller about a desperate crime, but it's also a novel some will find hard to read. Although the word perfect is mocked throughout this book, I think it's safe to say the prose is perfect, and Zach's turn of phrase has produced a haunting and unforgettable debut. Clever, disturbing and brutal, I do recommend this nightmare tale of one family's life.
Book Bloggers Corner.
There you go, You Were Made for This by Michelle Sachs, and you can find a link to that in the show notes, along with a link to Catherine's blog that's packed full of book reviews and recommendations. Right, let's get back to my chat with Michael Redhill, where we talked a little bit more about Michael's process. So what would you say is your favourite part of the whole process of writing a novel, and what's your least favourite part?
My least favorite part is writing the first draft. Because it's just like you're so lost, you don't know why you turned right instead of left at a certain point. And I love rewriting. I could rewrite endlessly, and in fact, even after a book is published, and I do readings in public, I revise before I read because I see things that I don't want to read this to somebody because I no longer like it. So I'll cut or I'll add something. It's a nice feeling though because it feels like what you've done is alive. And, and will still respond to your touch.
It'd be interesting if someone's reading along as you as you're reading it out.
Oh, it has happened. I've had people come up afterwards and they've said, "Why did you change that?"
It's like changing the lyrics to a famous song or something whilst you're on stage.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, it'll harden and I won't be able to change it anymore. But it's in some ways it's a bit difficult to feel unsatisfied with a published work, but. It just means my critical faculty is still operating.
Sure, and obviously, if you were ever to go down the self-publishing route, especially if you're doing things electronically on Kindle, obviously you can refine and rewrite and edit infinite times if you like. You can just keep going with it.
Yeah, the book as an artifact is something that seems to be unchanging, but in our era of virtual writing and reading. There's a kind of flow or a kind of constant shifting that's possible, But a work of art, ultimately, the creator wants it to have a kind of unchanging unity, like a painting or a sculpture or something. You can go, well, that's it now. That's what it is. It's flaws and all. That's what it is. So it's a bit spoiled of me to rewrite books, to rewrite passages before readings, but I can't help it.
It's just how you're wired.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of move towards the end of our little chat, so if you were to go back and start your career again, or that first novel, would you do anything differently? And what would your advice be to someone that's just maybe starting out on their own journey?
I think one of the most important things is not to get too obsessed with getting into print, because I don't think there's a boat to miss. Mm-hmm. A lot of authors or younger writers will grow up in a cohort of friends who will begin to publish earlier than you, and then you feel there's this pressure on you to catch up, and I always try to tell young writers, first off, seeing your name in print is only exciting the first time, and then you have to stand behind your work. You can, if you rush something into print through bad decisions or misplaced good luck, you can't take that first book back, so I like to say to readers, I like to say to younger writers, take a deep breath, be more patient, rewrite it one more time, and, there'll still be a boat when you're ready to get on one. There'll still be one at the dock, and not to take the pressure of your cohort as a way of measuring your own progress. And if I went back to the beginning, I don't think I would be the writer that I've become unless I had failed all the ways that I failed when I was, trying to write a novel for the first time. Because I learned a lot of things that didn't work. And I also learned to let go of my pride around, if you've worked on a chapter for years and years and it's perfect, but then it has to come out for the good of the novel. Now I can do that. I'm not precious about it. So, but I'm not sure I would change very much. I've been very lucky. I've been a full-time writer for almost my whole life, even though I've done other kinds of things here and there. And it's an education. It's a self-education. But that's in a way what makes it feel real in the end. I know that I really led myself here. It wasn't a trick, and it wasn't a free pass or anything like that. And the other thing I tell young writers too is read a lot more than you write. That your best teacher is not a person; it's books.
That's really good advice. I completely agree. Yeah, that's really good advice. So can you just give us a bit of a quick sense of what you've got upcoming? You did mention another novel. I don't know what else you've got on, and maybe just tell people where they can find out a little bit more about you online, where they can find you online.
Okay. Well, the next book, I'm actually publishing my first collection of poetry in 20 years next spring. So that's pretty big because I was writing poems not intending to publish them, and so they got pretty weird. But now I'm publishing them. So that's exciting and scary. The next novel, which comes out in Canada in the fall of 2019, is called Mason of Tunica. And it is the second book in this triptych of novels, Bellevue Square being the first one. And it takes on some of the same themes. There's a haunting, there's an investigation, the main character is on the trail of a deadbeat dad. But while he's doing this investigation, he's accompanied by the ghost of his dead wife, who is both helping and hindering him as he tries to find this man. In terms of, I don't have a website, but my publishers do. So in the UK, it's No Exit, and No Exit will be bringing out Mason of Tunica probably in 2020, I would think. And I'm on Facebook and I'm public, so folks can follow me. And I'm a fairly regular poster on Facebook. Being 52, I have only so much time and energy for social media. So I'm sort of committed to Twitter and Facebook, but I don't do Instagram, and I don't have a website because I can't deal with the upkeep.
No, you're too busy writing.
Yeah, but I'm also reachable. Like, I used to be an editor for a magazine in Canada called Brick Magazine, and people track me down through Brick, and they can find me in other ways. So, I'm not invisible online.
No, well, I'll put all those links in the show notes as well. So for now, I know you're going to hang around just for a few minutes for our little bonus epilogue question, but for now, Michael, really appreciate chatting to you. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. I appreciate your questions.
Okay, thanks again to Michael, and you can buy Bellevue Square right now in all the usual places, and I'll put Michael's links in the show notes over at joineduprighting.co.uk. That wraps things up for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from to have the show downloaded automatically every single week. And also remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, and you can tweet me with where you're listening to the show or why you enjoy the show, and I'll give you a mention in a future programme. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up writing.